Yes, I was the man who stood in front of 100 guests and humiliated my wife on our 25th anniversary. I called it finally being honest. But what I really did was destroy the only person who ever believed in me. That night, I thought I was starting a new life with someone younger, someone better. Instead, I ended my own. And if you're wondering how a man can lose everything in one toast, stay. Because I'm the proof. I've done terrible things, but I'm trying to be honest now. If you're watching this, please stay till the end. Maybe my story will stop someone from doing the same. And if you believe in second chances, subscribe and let me know you're out there. When the applause never came, I knew something inside me had snapped. You don't forget that kind of silence. It was the kind that hums, heavy, endless, like the air itself was holding its breath, waiting for me to realize what I'd done. I stood there, holding the mic, my mouth still halfway open, the last word stuck on my tongue. I thought they'd understand, that people would see me as brave, decisive, a man finally cutting ties from a dead marriage. But all I saw were faces frozen in disgust. Even my mother, who'd pushed me toward that moment, couldn't look straight at me. The lights felt hotter. My heart was racing, not from pride, but from something colder, panic. In that exact second, I wanted to rewind everything. But there's no backspace in real life. Once you humiliate someone in public, those words live forever. That night, I kept replaying it in my head like a movie I didn't want to watch anymore. The sound of the microphone feedback. The way Naomi's eyes didn't even water. She just stared at me, calm, almost pitying. That was worse than if she had screamed, because her silence told me she already knew who I had become. I tried to justify it at first. I told myself it was self-defense, that I was finally standing up for myself after years of feeling invisible. I said she never understood me, that she was too serious, too quiet, too old-fashioned. It's funny how easily a guilty mind can dress cowardice as courage. The truth? I wasn't trying to be brave. I was trying to look powerful. And power, at least the kind I wanted, needed an audience. I'd spent months convincing myself that Naomi was holding me back, that her calmness was control, that her loyalty was indifference. I told myself she didn't make me feel alive anymore, as if it was her job to keep me entertained. But none of that was true. What really killed me inside was the mirror. Every time I looked at her, I saw the years passing, the grey in my hair, the lines around my eyes. She aged gracefully, I just aged. When Sierra laughed at my jokes, when she touched my arm and called me inspiring, I didn't hear flattery. I heard youth, I heard possibility, and I let that sound drown everything else. My mother's voice didn't help either. She'd whisper, "You deserve more, Darren. You've worked too hard to live like this." She meant comfort, pride, a family name that meant something, but I twisted those words into permission to betray, to escape, to rewrite the story in which I was no longer the fading husband, but the man reborn. You know, when you start lying to yourself, you don't do it in one big leap. It happens quietly, in tiny edits. You delete one truth, soften another, and before you know it, you've cut out the parts where you were the problem. I did that every single day. By the time the anniversary came, I had built an entire script in my head. I would thank Naomi for everything she'd done, announce that our paths had diverged, and introduce Sierra as my new beginning. I practiced the lines in front of the mirror like an actor rehearsing for a standing ovation, but I never rehearsed what would happen after. The thing about being wrong is, it's invisible when you're surrounded by people who tell you you're right. And I had plenty of those, friends who envied my fresh start, co-workers who called me bold, a mother who said, "Finally." Not one person said, "Are you sure?" Not even me. So when I stood there with the mic in hand, I wasn't just ending a marriage, I was performing my own illusion. And when it shattered, I didn't just lose a wife, I lost the man I pretended to be. That's what guilt feels like. Not fire, not punishment, just emptiness. The kind that follows you even when everyone else leaves the room. After the guests walked out and the music stopped, I sat alone at that table. the one decorated with silver roses Naomi had chosen. Her chair was still pulled out, her napkins still folded neatly. She hadn't even finished her wine. I remember staring at that glass for what felt like hours. It still had her lipstick mark on the rim. Somehow that tiny stain hurt more than her words ever could. In the weeks that followed, I told everyone I was fine. I told myself I was fine. But every night I woke up at 3 a.m. hearing her voice say nothing, just that silence, the kind that tells you the damage is permanent. And that's when the questions started. When did I become the kind of man who needed to win at someone else's expense? When did being admired matter more than being decent? When did I stop loving her, or did I ever stop really? Those questions still don't have answers, but I guess that's why I'm telling this story now. Because if I don't speak it, it'll rot inside me forever. People like to think marriages break in one loud moment, a fight, an affair, a slammed door. But mine didn't. It cracked quietly, the way ice thins underfoot long before you hear it snap. Naomi and I met in college. She was calm, deliberate, the kind of woman who listened more than she spoke. I mistook that silence for admiration. Maybe it was, back then. I was loud, full of plans, and she steadied me. For a long time, that balance worked. She handled the details, I chased the dreams. We built a home that looked perfect from the outside, the neat lawn, the holiday photos, the polite laughter at dinner parties. But after 25 years, the rhythm that once felt safe started to sound like a cage. I'd come home from work, drop my keys on the counter, and hear the same small noises, the kettle, the soft radio jazz, her voice asking, "Long day?" It should have comforted me. Instead, it reminded me how predictable I'd become. She hadn't changed. I had. And that's the part I couldn't admit. At 48, I began noticing time in cruel ways. Mirrors, birthdays, younger colleagues who called me sir. I wasn't old, but I wasn't young anymore either. And something about that in-between terrified me. Every achievement suddenly looked temporary. Every smile from Naomi felt polite, not passionate. We tried to talk once. She suggested taking a trip, maybe volunteering somewhere new. I brushed it off. I told her I was too busy at the firm, that we'd do it next quarter. What I really meant was, I didn't want to sit across from her long enough to face the truth that maybe I had gone dull, not the marriage. Then came the business slump. Construction slowed, investors pulled out, and I started bringing home frustration like dust on my clothes. Naomi never complained. She just kept the lights on, made dinner, and left me space. But her patience, that same quiet strength I used to admire, started to feel like judgment. When she said, "We'll be okay," I heard, "You failed again." That's how resentment sneaks in, through the small rewrites of what people actually mean. My mother, Celeste, moved closer around that time. She'd lost my father years ago and carried her widowhood like a trophy of endurance. She adored Naomi once, but grief twisted her pride. "She doesn't challenge you enough," she'd whisper over lunch. "A man needs fire to stay alive." I laughed it off, but her words stayed. I began measuring Naomi against an imaginary version of her, younger, louder, more grateful. At work, I met clients who fed that ego. They called me visionary, told me I looked younger than my age, that my energy was rare. I soaked it in like water. Compliments became oxygen. Home felt like a drought. The first real crack appeared during our 24th anniversary. We went to a small restaurant we'd loved in our 30s. Same table, same dish. Naomi smiled and said, "Some things never change." I smiled back, but in my head that sounded like a curse. I remember looking at her hands, gentle, veined, the rings slightly loose now, and thinking how unfair it was that I could notice every sign of age on her, but ignore the ones on myself. That night, I stayed late in the car after we got home. I scrolled through photos of old projects, old parties, even old versions of me, the one who seemed sharper, lighter. I told myself I just missed the thrill of beginnings. But the truth is, I was already searching for an ending. The months that followed were filled with small betrayals, checking my phone more often, keeping secrets that weren't yet sins, imagining conversations with people who weren't Naomi. I convinced myself I deserved something new, though I never defined what that meant. When you've spent years being the provider, the responsible one, people assume you're immune to foolishness. You start to believe it too. That's why when temptation came later, I didn't see it as danger. I saw it as a reward. But before Sierra, before any of that, there was this slow erosion, not of love, but of humility. I stopped saying thank you. I stopped listening. I stopped being curious about her world because I was too busy guarding mine. And the saddest part, she noticed. Of course she did. She asked me once, softly, "Are you happy, Darren?" I said, "Why wouldn't I be?" But my tone betrayed me. Defensive, sharp. She nodded. The way you nod when you realize the conversation is over before it begins. Looking back, that was the first time she truly stepped away from me. Not physically, but somewhere deeper. And I let her. I even felt relief, because her distance made my guilt quieter. That's how it starts. Not with cheating, not with lying. It starts when you stop trying to be known. It started at a charity gala downtown, the kind of event where everyone pretends to care more about the cause than about being seen. I was there on behalf of the firm, half bored, half anxious about our dwindling contracts. Naomi didn't come. She'd said she was tired. I told myself I didn't mind. That night, I met Sierra. She was young, 27, maybe 28, ambitious, confident, all sharp heels and smooth charm. She laughed at my jokes like they were new. That shouldn't have meant anything, but when you've been invisible for too long, even polite attention feels like a spotlight. She said she admired my presence. No one had said that to me in years. Not success, not work, not career, presence. Like I still filled a room. We talked about business, travel, then dreams, or at least what she thought mine were. I told her things I hadn't told Naomi in years. My fear of slowing down, my regret about never being a father, my wish to feel seen again. She listened like every word was proof that I was someone important. By the end of the night, I wasn't in love, but I was addicted, not to her, but to who I got to be around her. For weeks, I convinced myself it was harmless. Lunch meetings, long texts, inside jokes. Naomi would ask, "Rough day?" and I'd nod, pretending exhaustion while my phone buzzed in my pocket. Sierra called me D, said it made me sound younger. I liked it more than I should have. My mother met her accidentally at a networking event. Later that night, she said, "That girl admires you, Darren. You need people like that around you." And just like that, the door between decency and disaster opened. Celeste had always been protective, but after my father died, that protection became ownership. She thought she knew what was best for me, even when it meant hurting others. She never liked how independent Naomi was. "She's too calm, too sure of herself," she'd whisper. "Men like us need warmth, not walls." Men like us. I didn't even correct her. One Sunday, Mom invited Sierra over for brunch under the pretense of business. Watching them talk felt surreal. My mother's approving smile, Sierra's respectful tone, the silent permission between them. That day, something in me shifted. The guilt I should have felt turned into validation. When you're drowning, you'll mistake any hand reaching out as salvation, even if it's pulling you deeper. Naomi, of course, noticed. She never accused, never searched my phone, never yelled. She just became quieter. I mistook that silence as indifference, when it was probably heartbreak. Then one evening, while Naomi was setting the table, Mum called. Loudspeaker on, she said, "Darren, if you stay in that comfort zone, you'll die there. You deserve a woman who reminds you you're still alive." Naomi froze, holding a plate. She didn't look up. She just said, "Dinner's ready." I didn't know it then, but that was the moment she stopped believing we could be saved. From there, everything felt inevitable. Sierra became my assistant at work. Official title, business email, meetings by design. She was efficient, clever, and knew exactly how to make me feel irreplaceable. The firm started depending on her. I started depending on her. And Naomi? She became the ghost of the life I was trying to erase. I told myself she deserved better, that I was setting her free. It sounds noble, right? It wasn't. It was cowardice wearing a nice suit. When the idea of the anniversary speech came up, it wasn't spontaneous. It was months of whispers from my mother, encouragement from Sierra, and fantasies I'd built about starting over. Celeste said, "Do it publicly, Darren. End things with dignity. Show people you're not ashamed of your choices." She made betrayal sound like bravery, and I believed her. I started drafting that speech like it was a business proposal. I wrote lines like, "Sometimes love evolves," and "We've grown apart but with respect." I rehearsed them in front of the mirror, convincing myself I was being mature. Naomi planned the party herself. She thought we were renewing our vows. When I realized that, I should have stopped. I should have taken her hands, told her the truth, even if it broke her. But I didn't. Because deep down, I wanted the scene, the applause, the admiration, the clean slate. I told myself it was closure. But closure isn't something you give yourself by taking someone else's dignity. It's something you earn after you face what you've done. I wasn't ready for that. So I kept lying, to her, to Sierra, to everyone, especially to myself. The week before our anniversary, I told myself I was calm. But calm isn't peace. It's pressure that hasn't exploded yet. Every detail of that night had been planned. I booked the ballroom at the Watergate, hired a small orchestra, and told Naomi it was my surprise for her, a celebration of 25 years together. She smiled, her eyes lighting up the way they used to, and for a moment I almost confessed everything. Almost. Then my phone buzzed. Sierra had texted, "You're doing the right thing. New beginnings are never easy." Just 6 words. But they were enough to drown the small voice inside me that whispered, "Coward." I spent that entire week rehearsing, not just the speech, but the tone, the smile, the posture. I wanted to look composed, like a man in control of his destiny. In truth, I was a man scripting his own humiliation and calling it courage. I practiced in the mirror after Naomi went to bed. I'd look at my reflection and say, "Naomi, you've been my partner, my anchor, but life changes." Every time I said her name, my throat tightened, so I started skipping it. It made lying easier. My mother came by 2 nights before the event. She brought me cufflinks, my father's. She said, "He would be proud, Darren. You're finally taking charge." That word, proud, it poisoned everything. I'd been chasing her pride my entire life. Even as a grown man, part of me still wanted to be her good son. The day before the party, Naomi was humming in the kitchen, baking a cake. She said she wanted to surprise me for once. I watched her from the hallway, her hands dusted with flour, her hair tied back, still wearing that same apron she'd had for years. And I felt something strange, not guilt, not love, but this hollow ache, like I was watching the last good thing in my life and deciding to burn it anyway. I remember she asked, "Should I wear blue or silver?" I said silver, because I thought it would look good for the photos, not realizing it would also match the tears that night. The morning of the event, I woke up before her. The city outside was quiet, foggy. I looked at her sleeping beside me and wondered if, in another version of our lives, I could have been a better man. But by then, fantasy was my only form of courage. At work, everyone knew. Sierra had told a few people, discreetly, which meant everyone whispered about how Darren was finally moving on. They congratulated me in advance. "Bold move," one said. "You deserve happiness," another added. Each compliment was gasoline poured over shame, and I mistook the heat for energy. That evening, when I put on the tuxedo, I remember looking in the mirror one last time. For a split second, I saw my father's eyes in my reflection, tired, disappointed. Then I blinked, straightened my tie, and walked out. Naomi looked beautiful that night, elegant, calm, radiant in the silver dress I'd chosen for her. She thanked me for everything, the dinner, the guests, the orchestra. She even leaned in and whispered, "You outdid yourself this time." If hell exists, it's that moment replaying in my head forever. During the dinner, I kept checking the time. Sierra sat 2 tables away with a few colleagues, pretending to be part of the event staff. Our eyes met a few times. She smiled, small, confident. In her mind, and mine, this was the birth of a new chapter. I remember gripping the note cards in my pocket, feeling the sweat soak through the paper. Every cell in my body screamed, "Don't do it." But pride is louder than conscience, especially when you've rehearsed the lie long enough to believe its truth. When the orchestra paused and the room quieted, I stood. Naomi's hand touched my arm lightly, smiling as if expecting a toast of love. And I smiled back. That's the part that haunts me most. I smiled. I walked to the stage, adjusted the mic, and told myself this was mercy, that ending things now, publicly, would save us both years of slow decay. What I really wanted was applause. Applause for being the man brave enough to speak his truth. The irony? I had no truth left, just a carefully curated performance built on fear, vanity, and the desperate need to feel alive again. As I began my speech, I saw Naomi's eyes glisten, not with tears, but with pride. She thought I was about to thank her. I was about to destroy her. That's the memory that still wakes me up at night. Not the fallout, not the headlines, just that one look, full of trust. Right before I shattered it forever. The room smelled of champagne and perfume, and for a second it felt like any other celebration. Glasses clinked, the band tuned up softly, laughter floated through the hall. I remember thinking, this is it, this is my moment. My palms were sweating through the cue cards. I'd rehearsed every line, every pause, but when I saw Naomi smiling at me from the head table, something inside me stumbled. She looked proud. She believed this night was about love, renewal, the future we'd promised 2.5 decades ago. That belief should have saved me. It didn't. I stood up when the music paused, and one of the waiters dimmed the lights slightly, my cue. The microphone felt heavier than it should. I remember clearing my throat, tapping it, pretending confidence. Naomi reached out to squeeze my hand before I walked toward the small stage. That gentle touch, her last gesture of trust, nearly undid me. But I smiled anyway, because I was too far gone to turn back. "Good evening, everyone," I began. My voice sounded calm, almost rehearsed. A few people clapped politely. "I want to thank you all for being here to celebrate 25 wonderful years with my wife, Naomi." Applause, flash of cameras, Naomi's face glowing under the lights. And then, my first lie. "Tonight isn't just a celebration," I said. "It's also a moment of truth." I heard a small murmur ripple through the crowd, but I pressed on. I told myself this was necessary, that this was maturity, honesty, evolution. Every word was a shield against guilt. I spoke about how people change, how love transforms, how life sometimes redirects us. Big words, empty words. Behind them hid a man terrified of aging, terrified of fading, terrified of himself. As I talked, my eyes flicked toward Sierra. She sat near the back, her face glowing with something like victory. Her slight nod said, "Keep going." It was the approval I'd been starving for. And then I looked back at Naomi. Her expression had shifted, not fear, not confusion yet, just a small crease between her brows, the start of realization. That's when my chest tightened. I could have stopped right there. I could have closed the speech with gratitude, kissed her cheek, gone home and confessed in private. But stopping meant admitting weakness. And I'd built this whole night on the illusion of control. So I kept talking. I said phrases I thought sounded noble. We've grown in different directions. We both deserve happiness. This isn't an ending, but a transition. The crowd began to shift uncomfortably. The clinking glasses stopped. Someone coughed. Naomi's hands were clasped on her lap now, knuckles white. I pretended not to notice, because if I did, I'd crumble. At one point, I even tried to smile, like this was a TED talk about self-discovery. I joked about life's unpredictable paths. No one laughed. All I could hear was my heartbeat echoing through the mic. My mother sat at the front table, chin high. lips tight, proud. Her expression was the anchor keeping me from drowning. I thought I was doing it for her, for dignity, for some strange version of manhood she'd taught me. But when I finally reached the part where I said, "Naomi, I'll always respect you, but it's time we both move on," her eyes lifted to mine, and I swear I heard something break. Not glass, not voice, just that invisible thread between two people who once promised never to hurt each other like this. I felt the weight of 100 stares, and yet I didn't stop. Because pride doesn't allow silence, it demands a finale. So I kept performing, telling the crowd how grateful I was, thanking Naomi for her grace, and then, the final cruelty, I gestured towards Sierra. "She's been helping me through this transition," I said. "She's important to me." The gasp that followed wasn't just shock, it was disgust. The air itself seemed to shrink, pressing against me like judgment. Naomi didn't move, didn't cry. She just sat there, staring at me with eyes that saw everything, every excuse, every weakness, every lie. And for the first time all evening, I heard the truth in my own voice. It wasn't steady anymore. It cracked. I should have stopped right then, dropped the mic, fallen to my knees, begged forgiveness. But the coward in me clung to the script, because when you build your identity on performance, silence feels like death. So I took a breath, smiled again, and said the line that sealed my fate. "To new beginnings." No one clapped, just that same heavy silence, the one that started the end of everything. For 3 seconds after I said "to new beginnings," the room stayed perfectly still. No sound, no clinking glasses, no polite applause, just a strange, suffocating silence, the kind that makes you realize you've crossed a line you can't ever come back from. Then came the whispers, short, sharp, cutting. Someone near the bar muttered, "Is he serious?" Another voice hissed, "With his assistant?" The silence cracked into noise, not laughter, not applause, judgment. Naomi still hadn't moved. She just stared at me. That stillness was more terrifying than any scream. It was the look of someone watching a car crash she couldn't stop, except she was the one inside it. My throat went dry. For a split second, I thought about backtracking, saying it was all a misunderstanding, a joke, anything. But then I saw my mother's expression. She nodded. Slightly, like a general signaling a soldier to finish what he started. So I smiled again, as if nothing was wrong, as if I hadn't just detonated my marriage in front of 100 witnesses. "Let's raise our glasses," I said, voice trembling now. A few people lifted theirs, out of pity, not respect. Most didn't move at all. And then Naomi stood up, slowly, deliberately. She didn't look angry. She looked disappointed. That's somehow worse. She took the microphone from my hand without saying a word. Her fingers brushed mine, and I felt how cold they were. For a moment, I thought she'd just leave, walk out quietly, like she'd done so many times before when I'd said something careless. But she didn't walk away. She turned to face the crowd. "Thank you all for coming," she began. Her voice was calm, steady, almost too steady. "I didn't know tonight was about endings, but I suppose I should have seen it coming." People were whispering now, phones subtly raised. My stomach twisted. Naomi continued, "My husband's right. It is time for change. And since we're being honest..." She reached into her clutch and pulled out an envelope. I remember the sound of paper sliding against paper, quiet, surgical. "These," she said, holding them up, "are the property deeds to our home, which, as it turns out, is entirely in my name, and the company accounts, also mine, as of last month." The room gasped. I froze. She turned to me then, eyes steady. "I may not be young, Darren, but I'm not blind. You wanted a public ending. You have it." Laughter broke somewhere in the back. Nervous, uncertain. My mother's face went white. I tried to speak, but my voice refused to come. Naomi wasn't finished. "You see, while you were planning your speech, I was meeting with our lawyer, and I made sure that when you decided to leave me, You'd be free, completely free. No house, no accounts, no reputation left to ruin. Every word landed like a blow. People were watching me, some with shock, some with grim satisfaction. The orchestra quietly stopped tuning. Even the air conditioner seemed to hush itself. Naomi handed the mic back to me. "You wanted applause, Darren," she said softly. "Here's your silence." And then she walked out. Just like that. No shouting, no tears, no dramatic exit. Just grace. The kind of grace I'd mistaken for weakness all those years. I stood there, holding the mic like a fool, staring at the door she'd just walked through. I could hear whispers turning into murmurs, murmurs into chuckles, chuckles into outright talk. Someone clapped, sarcastically. Another said, "Guess the party's over." They were right. Sierra was frozen near the back, her confidence gone. She looked terrified, not for me, but for herself. My mother's hands shook. She whispered, "We'll fix this." But her voice didn't sound so certain anymore. I wanted to disappear, to dissolve into that expensive carpet, to undo every second of that night. But that's not how consequences work. You don't get to vanish from the mess you make. You stand in it until it stains you. I stepped off the stage. No one stopped me. People moved aside like I was contagious, and maybe I was, carrying the infection of my own arrogance. I found my way to the empty hallway outside, the sound of music slowly fading behind me. I leaned against the wall, still holding the mic, and for the first time that night, I saw my reflection in one of the tall mirrors. The man looking back wasn't confident or brave or powerful. He was just small and scared and utterly alone. That's when it hit me. I hadn't humiliated Naomi. I'd humiliated myself in front of everyone I'd ever wanted respect from. And for the first time in years, I wanted nothing but her forgiveness, even though I knew I didn't deserve it. The next morning, the city looked the same. Cars still moved, people still rushed to work, sunlight still crawled through the blinds. But inside my apartment, everything felt different, like the world had quietly agreed to move on without me. I woke up in the tuxedo from the night before, half on the couch, half on the floor. My phone was buzzing with notifications. For a second, I hoped it was a dream. Then I saw the headlines. Businessman blindsides wife with public breakup. Watergate humiliation goes viral. Someone had filmed the whole thing, multiple angles. My face, Naomi's calm, the moment she handed me those documents. It was everywhere. I opened one of the clips. In the background, I could hear someone whisper, "What an idiot." That voice followed me like a ghost the rest of the day. By 9 a.m., my firm's PR manager called. Her voice was careful, professional, terrified. "Darren," she said, "we need to put you on temporary leave. The board's meeting this afternoon." Temporary leave. Such a polite way of saying get lost. I looked around my living room, half-empty champagne glass, wilted roses, the cufflinks my mother had given me lying on the coffee table. Everything looked expensive and meaningless. I tried calling Naomi. Straight to voicemail. Then I tried Sierra. No answer. The silence between those two rings told me more than any conversation ever could. Around noon, Mom showed up at my door, sunglasses hiding the shame she refused to name. She spoke first, of course. "They ambushed you," she said. "That woman humiliated you on purpose. We'll sue her for defamation." That woman. She couldn't even say Naomi's name. I didn't answer. I just stared at the screen of my phone, still looping the video of me standing there, frozen, as Naomi walked out. The internet loved it. Comments poured in by the thousands. "She's a queen." He got what he deserved. Imagine embarrassing your wife like that. For years, I had chased validation, applause, approval. Now I had it, just from the wrong audience for the wrong reasons. Mum paced the room, still talking about lawyers, public statements, spin control. But her voice sounded distant, like static. Because beneath all her words, I heard the one truth I'd been avoiding. No one could fix this, not even her. When she finally left, I sat there in the silence she'd filled with denial. The truth settled over me like dust, quiet, heavy, suffocating. Around 3 p.m., Sierra finally called. Her tone was thin, nervous. "Hey, I saw the video," she said. "It's bad. People are tagging me. I might need to step away from the company for a bit." A bit. That phrase hurt more than the headlines. She didn't say we, she said I. I tried to sound calm. "Of course, do what you need." What I wanted to say was, "Don't leave me now." But she hung up before I could. It hit me then. She'd never been in love with me. She was in love with the story of me, the successful man who could open doors. And when that story burned, she walked away to find another. By evening, the board officially suspended me. They used words like reputation risk, conduct unbecoming, company image. No one said betrayal, but that's what it was. From me to them, from them back to me. Business doesn't do sympathy, it does damage control. That night, I went back to our old house, not to apologize, not yet. I told myself I just wanted to see it one more time. Naomi wasn't there, of course. The place was spotless, cold. A single suitcase missing from the closet. On the kitchen counter, she'd left the anniversary cake she'd baked. Still wrapped in clear plastic, there was a note beside it, only 2 words, "No more lies." I didn't cry, I just stood there, staring at those words until the letters blurred. Then I sat on the floor, ate a piece of that cake with my hands like a starving man. It tasted like sugar and salt, sweetness and regret, baked into the same bite. At some point, I must have fallen asleep right there on the tiles, because I woke up to morning light pouring through the window. For the first time in years, I didn't reach for my phone. There was no one left to text, nothing left to prove. I used to think rock bottom was dramatic, sirens, shouting, loss. But it isn't. It's quiet. It's waking up to your own reflection and realizing no one's waiting for you anymore. That morning, I finally understood what Naomi had given me all those years: silence. But her silence used to mean patience. Now it meant absence, and I'd earned every bit of it. In the days that followed, my phone wouldn't stop ringing, but no one was calling to help. Reporters, tabloids, online talk shows. Everyone wanted a quote, a reaction, a confession. It was strange being famous for all the wrong reasons. For years, I'd chased visibility. Now I wanted to disappear. On the 3rd day, I finally turned my phone off. The silence was worse than the noise. That's when I realized how many people had vanished with the scandal. My friends, the ones who used to toast me at dinners, send me links to yacht rentals, and call me brother, suddenly forgot my number. One of them texted me, "You'll bounce back." I stared at that message for a long time before deleting it. Bounce back from what? From myself? The firm's website quietly removed my profile. My office was under review. Even my assistant, a guy who once called me a mentor, stopped replying to my emails. In 48 hours, I went from respected executive to a headline people used for clicks. Mom called every day, sometimes twice. Her tone shifted from anger to panic. "These people have no class," she'd say. "We'll rebuild your reputation. You just need to lie low for a while." But I could hear it in her voice, the crack in her certainty. For the first time in my life, my mother didn't have a plan. She started visiting the house more often. Rearranging furniture like that could erase the stench of humiliation. She'd say things like, "Your father would never have let this happen." And I'd nod, even though I knew he probably would have been disappointed in both of us. By the end of the week, I couldn't stand her voice anymore. I told her I needed space. She didn't take it well. She accused me of abandoning her after all she'd done. It was ironic, hearing the same word Naomi could have used. That night, I sat alone with a bottle of whiskey I didn't even like. I wasn't drinking to forget. I was drinking to feel something again. Because humiliation, once it cools down, leaves nothing but numbness. The next morning, I woke up to pounding at the door. 2 men from the firm's legal department. They came to collect company property, my laptop, my ID, the car keys. One of them couldn't even look me in the eye. The other said, "You'll receive formal notice next week." Formal notice. That's corporate language for execution. When they left, I stood in the doorway holding nothing but the sound of my own breathing. Even the hallway seemed to echo with pity. Around noon, Sierra called. Her voice was distant, like someone already halfway out the door. "I think it's best if we take some time," she said. Take some time. The polite phrase people use before they vanish. I wanted to yell, to remind her how much she'd pushed me toward that night. But what would that change? The truth was simple. I'd let her use me because it felt easier than facing what I'd become. When the call ended, I didn't even feel angry, just empty. I scrolled through social media, the comments, the memes, the jokes. They'd made a gif of me raising the champagne glass. Someone captioned it, "Cheers to losing everything." It had over 1 million views. I shut the laptop. I couldn't breathe. Not from the shame, from the realization that my life had turned into entertainment. That evening, Mum showed up again. She looked older, smaller. She sat down beside me and said, "You'll thank me one day. I only ever wanted you to be happy." I wanted to tell her that's the problem. She wanted me to be happy on her terms. Instead, I said nothing. We just sat there, two people who'd spent their whole lives confusing control with love. She cried that night. I'd never seen my mother cry before. That image, her hand shaking, mascara running, will never leave me. After she left, I walked into the bathroom and stared at myself in the mirror. The man staring back looked like a stranger, hollow eyes, unshaven, the lines on his face deeper than ever. For the first time, I didn't flinch at the reflection. I just said quietly, "You did this." No one else to blame, not Naomi, not Sierra, not my mother, just me. The phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from an unknown number. "I hope you find peace, Darren." No name. But I knew it was Naomi. I read it 5 times. She didn't say forgiveness. She said peace. It was the kindest cruelty I'd ever received. That night, I turned off all the lights and sat in the dark. I listened to the hum of the refrigerator, the distant sounds of traffic, the hollow rhythm of my own heartbeat. I realized I'd built my entire life on noise, applause, validation, approval, and now that it was gone, silence was all that was left. It should have felt empty. Instead, it felt honest. 2 weeks after the party, I wasn't Darren Price, the director of a construction firm. I was that guy from the Watergate video, the man who humiliated his wife and lost everything, a walking meme. The world didn't forget, it replayed. Every news outlet had a segment, every podcast a moral analysis. Even strangers at coffee shops whispered when I walked by. People love watching a fall from grace. It makes them feel safe where they stand. My mother still believed we could fix it. She hired a PR consultant, the kind who charged by the hour just to tell us what we already knew. There was nothing left to spin. The internet had decided who I was, and in this era, that's a life sentence. Mum tried to hold the illusion together. She'd call journalists, deny rumours, even send out photos of me volunteering at shelters. Fake, staged, humiliating. But it didn't work. She broke down one afternoon after a reporter followed her to the grocery store. "They're vultures," she screamed. "They don't care about truth." I wanted to tell her the truth they were showing was mine. Within a month, the firm made my termination official. No severance, no pension, no reputation. Bills piled up. The apartment I'd moved into was too expensive, so I sold the car, then the watch, then the furniture. I didn't even bother fighting Naomi in court. She didn't have to lift a finger. Everything was already hers, legally. Some nights, I caught myself scrolling through old photos of us, the vacations, birthdays, her laugh frozen mid-motion. Each picture felt like proof of a person I'd killed with arrogance. Then the lawsuits started. Investors wanted compensation for damaged brand reputation. Sierra vanished completely. No calls, no texts. Her LinkedIn now said she was rebranding as a business strategist. She'd deleted every photo of us. It was like I'd been erased from her timeline, and maybe that was fair. Mom's health declined fast. Stress, shame, exhaustion, it all hit her at once. One morning I found her sitting in the dark, staring at nothing. When I touched her shoulder, she whispered, I only wanted you to be respected. I said, you taught me to care more about being seen than being good. She didn't reply. A week later, she had a minor stroke. Hospitals are cruel in their brightness. Everything sterile, honest, and impossible to hide from. When I sat by her bed, I finally understood how much of my life had been lived trying to please a ghost. Her idea of success, my father's absence, society's applause. I'd traded my soul for their nods. After she was discharged, she moved in with my sister. She didn't want me around. I can't look at you, she said softly. You remind me of everything I did wrong. And she was right. By then, I'd stopped checking social media, stopped answering calls. I deleted my accounts, shut down my website, closed the door on everything that used to define me. The first night without any screens felt like drowning. The second felt like breathing. I started taking long walks after midnight when no one would recognize me. That's when I noticed how quiet the city really is when it stops caring about you. No applause, no gossip, just air. Sometimes I'd see couples walking hand in hand and wonder if Naomi ever did that with someone new. The thought hurt, but not from jealousy, from the realization that she'd finally found peace, and I'd only now started searching for it. Eventually, the money ran out. I sold the last thing I owned that mattered, my father's cufflinks. I remember holding them for a long time before handing them to the pawn shop owner. He looked at me like he recognized me but couldn't place from where. That was almost a relief. With the little cash I had left, I rented a small room above a garage in the outskirts of town. No luxury, no internet, no noise. Just a bed, a kettle, and a cracked window that let the wind whistle through. At first, I hated it. The silence was unbearable. It echoed with every word I'd ever said wrong. But after a while, something strange happened. I stopped arguing with it. Silence stopped accusing me. It started teaching me. One morning, I woke up to birds outside the window, the first sound I'd noticed in weeks that wasn't in my head. I made a cup of instant coffee and stood there staring at the light coming through the curtain. For the first time in years, there was no one to perform for, no one to impress, no one to disappoint. It felt like punishment. But maybe that's what grace looks like when you've run out of excuses. Rock bottom isn't hell, it's clarity. It's the place where you finally stop trying to rewrite what already happened and start reading your own story for what it really is. That's where I was now, and for the first time, I didn't look away. 3 months after the scandal, when the world had mostly moved on, a journalist called me. She said she wanted to give me a chance to tell my side. Funny how that word, chance, felt both like a lifeline and a trap. At first I said no, I didn't want to explain myself anymore, but later that night I caught my reflection in the window, the same hollow eyes, the same empty apartment, and realized I'd been hiding behind silence. I'd turned shame into shelter. So I called her back. We met in a small cafe downtown. No cameras, just a recorder on the table and 2 cups of coffee between us. She introduced herself as Elena. Her voice was calm, her eyes sharp, the kind of person who listens for truth, not sound bites. She pressed the red button. "Why did you do it?" she asked. I thought I was ready. I wasn't, because no one had asked me that directly before. Not Naomi, not my mother, not even myself. I took a long breath. "I thought I deserved more," I said. She didn't write anything down. She just waited. "And what did you lose?" "Everything," I said. "But not because they took it from me, because I gave it away." Her eyes softened. "Do you regret it?" "I regret the reason I did it," I said. "Not because I lost, but because I became the kind of man who could do it." We sat in silence for a moment. Then she asked the question that finally cracked something inside me. "Do you think you ever loved her?" I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. For 25 years, I'd called it love. I'd said the words, bought the gifts, built the life. But love without humility isn't love. It's ownership dressed in affection. "I think," I said slowly, "I loved how she loved me. And when that stopped feeling like worship, I mistook it for indifference." Elena nodded, and for the first time I felt understood, not forgiven, but seen. Then she asked, "Have you talked to her since?" I shook my head. "No, she doesn't owe me that." "She sent you a message once, didn't she?" I looked up, startled. "How did you know?" She smiled faintly. "She mentioned it when I interviewed her." My stomach dropped. "You spoke to Naomi?" "Yes," she said softly. "Last month. She didn't want the story to be about revenge. She said, she hopes you find peace." That word again. Peace. It hit me harder hearing it from someone else's mouth. I bit the inside of my cheek, trying not to break down right there in front of a stranger. Elena leaned forward. "She said she forgave you, but not for you, for herself." Something in me shattered. I'd imagined anger, hatred, disgust. Forgiveness? I wasn't ready for that. Because forgiveness doesn't erase what you did. It just exposes how much you didn't deserve it. I don't remember much after that. Just my hands shaking, the sound of my own voice saying things I'd buried for months. "I didn't want to hurt her," I said. Elena tilted her head. "Then why did you?" "Because I couldn't stand feeling small next to someone who still believed in me." There it was, the truth, simple and brutal. Not lust, not greed, just insecurity wearing a mask of pride. I told her everything. The gala, the lies, the text messages, my mother's push, Sierra's flattery. I spoke until my throat hurt. And when I was done, she didn't thank me. She just said, "That's the first honest thing you've said on record." When she left, I stayed behind. The recorder was still on the table. I hit play. Hearing my own voice say, "I couldn't stand feeling small," felt like listening to a confession I didn't remember making. But it was mine. That night, Eleanor sent me the draft of her article. The title read, "The Man Who Finally Stopped Lying." For the first time since that night at the Watergate, I didn't feel the urge to correct the narrative. Because for once, it was true. I didn't sleep. I sat by the window till dawn, listening to the city breathe. And for the first time, I didn't feel angry or ashamed or desperate. Just quiet. The kind of quiet that comes right before a storm finally breaks. And maybe, this time, I was ready to get wet. The article came out on a Sunday. No warning, no teaser, just there. Front page of a mid-sized digital magazine under the title, "The Man Who Finally Stopped Lying." My name was right below it, bold and unforgiving. At first, I didn't dare open it. Then curiosity won over fear, like it always had. I clicked. Elena hadn't changed my words. Not one. She didn't dramatize, didn't defend, she just let me speak. And that honesty, stripped bare of excuses, felt more brutal than any headline that had come before. Within an hour, the story spread. People shared it, debated it, dissected it. Some called me brave, others called me pathetic. I didn't correct either. By noon, my inbox was full again. This time, not from hate, but from strangers. Some said they'd been where I was. Some said they'd been Naomi. One woman wrote, "My husband left me the same way. I hope one day he understands, like you do now." It should have felt redemptive. It didn't. It felt heavy, like a truth too late to matter. Then the local radio picked it up, then national outlets. And just like that, I was back in the spotlight. But this time, not as the villain of a scandal, not as the headline to mock. This time I was the confession. People love a fall. But what they love even more is a redemption arc. They want proof that guilt can turn into grace, so they can believe it for themselves. By evening, my phone buzzed non-stop. Podcasts, TV producers, YouTubers, all wanting the man who owned his mistakes. I didn't answer any of them, because I wasn't trying to build a comeback. I was trying to build silence. But fame, even the broken kind, doesn't ask for permission. The next day, a camera crew showed up outside my building. One of them shouted, "Darren, do you have a message for your ex-wife?" I froze. Not because of the question, but because for the first time I realized I did. I walked up to the gate, looked straight into the lens, and said quietly, "Tell her." I finally listened. Then I turned around and went back inside. That clip went viral too, not because it was dramatic, but because it wasn't. People called it raw, unscripted, real, funny. That's all Naomi ever wanted from me, to be real. The following week, Elena texted me, "You okay?" I told her I didn't know. She replied, "Then you're finally being honest." Days passed. The noise online started fading again, replaced by the next scandal, the next tragedy, the next thing for people to care about. That's how the world moves. Fast, forgetful, efficient. But for me, time slowed down. I stopped avoiding mirrors, stopped checking headlines, started walking again, this time during daylight. Some people recognized me. They'd glance, whisper, maybe nod. I didn't hide, because for once, I didn't need to. One afternoon, I went to the park near the courthouse, the same place Naomi and I used to sit on Sundays. The bench was still there. I sat down and watched people pass, couples arguing softly, kids feeding pigeons, old men reading newspapers, all ordinary, all alive. A woman sat down beside me, probably in her 60s. She looked at me for a moment and said, "You're that man, aren't you?" I nodded. She smiled faintly. "You looked worse on camera." I laughed for the first time in months. It wasn't joyful, it was real. She said, "My husband cheated on me once. I forgave him. Took me 20 years to do it." Then she stood up, patted my shoulder, and walked away. That small gesture, a stranger's mercy, hit harder than any applause I'd ever received. As the sun went down, I realized something. The world hadn't punished me. It had simply reflected me, exactly as I was. Every humiliation, every consequence, every quiet moment afterward, all of it was earned. And maybe that's what redemption really is. Not getting back what you lost, but facing yourself without flinching. When I left the park, the air smelled like rain. I didn't rush home. For the first time in years, I had nowhere to be, and that didn't feel like failure. It felt like freedom. That night, before going to bed, I whispered something I hadn't said since the Watergate. "Thank you, Naomi." It wasn't an apology. It was acknowledgement that her silence had finally done what my words never could. It made me human again. Redemption isn't loud. No music swells when it happens. No audience claps. It starts quietly, in small, humiliating ways. For me, it began the day I stopped introducing myself as the man who ruined his marriage. That title had been my armor. If I said it first, no one else could use it against me. But armor gets heavy when there's no war left to fight. One morning, I looked in the mirror and said, "I'm just Darren. Not Darren the executive, not Darren the scandal, just me." It felt strange, like wearing someone else's skin, but for the first time, it fit. I found work again, not at a firm, not behind a desk. A small construction company near the river needed labourers. They didn't care about my past, they just needed hands. At first, I hesitated. The pay was low, the work brutal. But something about earning a day's wage with sweat instead of strategy felt honest. The first week nearly killed me. My body wasn't used to real labour anymore. My palms blistered, my back screamed. But each time I wiped the dust from my face, I felt more alive than I had in years. There was a guy named Luis on the crew, mid-30s, quiet, always humming while he worked. One afternoon, during a break, he asked out of nowhere, "You used to be somebody, right?" I almost laughed. "Used to think so." He nodded like he understood, then said, "We're all somebody until life humbles us." Then he went back to work. That one sentence taught me more than every therapist or book ever could. Humility. That was the thing I'd spent decades avoiding, confusing it with weakness when it was actually strength. Naomi had known that all along. That's why she never shouted, never fought back. She didn't need to win. She already understood what mattered. I started noticing details I used to ignore. The way the sunlight hit wet concrete, the rhythm of hammers, the quiet kindness of people who had nothing to prove. These men didn't need applause. They worked, they laughed, they went home. They were whole in a way I'd never been. Some evenings I'd walk by the old neighborhood where Naomi still lived, not close enough to be seen, just far enough to feel the ghost of what used to be. Through the window, I once saw her silhouette moving across the living room. There was another figure inside, a man, maybe a friend, maybe more. I didn't feel jealous. I felt grateful because it meant she'd healed, and maybe that meant there was still hope for me too. I never tried to contact her again. What would I say? I'm sorry? Those words are easy. Living differently. That's the real apology. So I built my life quietly, rented a smaller place, cooked my own meals, paid my bills on time. I learned to exist without an audience. And in that solitude, I discovered something unexpected. Peace doesn't erase guilt. It coexists with it. You learn to live alongside the ache, like an old injury that no longer bleeds but still aches when it rains. On Sundays, I sometimes visit my mother at the care home. She's fragile now. Her words come and go. Last week, she looked at me, confused, and asked, "Did you ever make her happy?" I wanted to lie, to comfort her, but I said, "For a while, maybe." She smiled faintly. "That's better than never." Then she fell asleep holding my hand. As I sat there, I realized something I'd missed my whole life. Love isn't about being adored. It's about being accountable, about showing up even when you've failed before. That's the part I'm still learning. Every morning I wake up, make coffee, tie my boots, and remind myself, redemption isn't a destination, it's a daily practice. It's in the small choices, telling the truth even when no one's watching, showing kindness without needing it returned, admitting weakness without shame. Sometimes I still hear echoes of that night, the gasps, the silence, Naomi's voice saying, "Here's your silence." And strangely, that memory no longer crushes me, it grounds me. Because silence, I've learned, is sacred when you finally stop trying to fill it with lies. A few weeks ago, a coworker asked why I always stay late cleaning up after everyone else. I told him, because once I made a mess that took years to clean. He didn't get it, and that's okay. Some truths don't need to be shared, only lived. These days, I don't measure my worth by who praises me or forgives me. I measure it by how I treat people who owe me nothing. I'm still not the man I wish I was. But I'm no longer the man I was, and maybe that's enough. When I walk home at dusk, the city lights blur in the distance. They used to look like spotlights. Now they look like stars. Distant, quiet, unbothered by who's watching. I don't chase them anymore. I just let them shine. Sometimes I wonder what people see when they watch my story now. Maybe they still see the villain. Maybe they see a man who learned too late. Either way, they're both right. Because the truth is, I was that man. Proud, reckless, selfish. But I'm also this man now, quiet, tired, learning. And between those two versions lies everything I lost and everything I finally understand. Naomi once told me, years before the fall, that love isn't proven by grand gestures. It's proven, she said, by the way you act when no one's clapping. I didn't get it then. Now I do. There's no applause where I am now, just mornings filled with coffee and the sound of the river where we pour concrete. It's not glamorous, but it's real. And for me, real is enough. If you've ever broken something you thought could never be fixed, yourself, someone else, a life, I hope you hear this. You can't undo the damage, but you can stop repeating it. That's the quiet mercy of time. I can't change what I did, but I can choose to live differently now. Even broken people can tell the truth.